Well, thank you. I don't know if you drew the short straw or are just curious or in any event are here. I hope that this information is helpful to you. I understand there's a lot of other stuff going on, so if you need to bop out, come in and out, that's just fine. I won't be offended. Just don't tell me that you're leaving because you don't like the presentation and we'll be fine. So essentially what I'm here to talk to you about is digital citizenship. And just so everybody knows, I used to be, I'm one of 4 attorneys at Harding Schultz that practices school law almost exclusively. So we represent about half the public schools in the state. We do not actively represent Lincoln Public Schools, but we've done these presentations from Chadron to Blair. I mean, we've truly been all over the state doing this stuff. So again, I'm really happy to be here, and I hope that what this is, that you feel at least that it's conversational. I've got plenty up here to carry us through the full time, but I hope if you have any questions as we're going through, you'll feel free to raise your hand and ask. There's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of stuff that, as was mentioned, is kind of scary. Some of the consequences of being a poor digital citizen are things that are very real and are happening here in Nebraska. So as a result of representing about half the schools in the state, we have seen all of this stuff. I know that it's happening in Lincoln. I know that it's happening in Grand Island. I know that it's happening in North Platte because it's happening everywhere. So just to get started here, how many are students? Do we have any students here? I know I see a few. Okay. Parents of elementary only students. Any? Okay. Parents of middle school students. High school students? A few? Okay. Well, the good news is this will apply to everybody because there is no age limit for this stuff happening. We had our first case of sexting with an 8-year-old probably about 3 months ago. An 8-year-old that had a cell phone and was taking pictures because older brother was taking pictures. So believe me, it's happening, and it's happening irrespective of the age of students or even their access to technology generally. So we'll get started with that. Please do let me know if you have any questions. I've got a few cartoons in here, so a little bit of gratuitous laughter is really all that I ask for your participation. Okay. I love starting with this slide because it gives me an opportunity to ask if there are any brave parents or other folks that are here that feel comfortable enough to raise your hand and name every single one of these apps for me. Nobody? Well, we got students. I bet you could name quite a few of them, couldn't you? Just looking up here at them? Probably so. Now, I won't put anybody on the spot, but I'll tell you that we've got some new ones and some really interesting ones. This is my favorite, Poof. Anybody heard of Poof? It is the app that your kids can download, which will be not visible on the main screens of their phone, like if they have an iPhone or something that scrolls back and forth. And it can, upon command, vanish all other apps that your kids don't want you to see. So if you've got a student who is using Snapchat or is inappropriately using something like Kick Messenger or Ask.me, we'll go over what all of these are and kind of talk about some of the cases that we've seen. But this is the newest craze because it also hides them from school administrators and police and other folks that might be interested in looking at what kids are doing online and through these apps. Tinder, I don't know that that's hit so much, mostly in the high school, but it's essentially a hookup app. It's an app, Tinder right here. It's an app that's really popular among college students, young adults, that essentially it's as simple as people in your geographic area, a picture will pop up of them, and if you find them attractive, you swipe right. If you don't find them attractive, you swipe left. And if both of you, on either ends of this digital first date, if you will, swiped right, then you can communicate with each other. We've got Kick Messenger, which is completely anonymous. We've got Yik Yak, which is completely anonymous. We've got ways that kids can hack their phones now. So even if you have parental settings on the phone, this gives them, this little app here, and really it's not an app, it's more of a process that students can use, gives them the ability to turn off things like your parental monitors that you may have on their phones. as quickly as they're coming up with parental monitors, there's money out there to be made in coming up with ways around them, right? Because your student will pay $1 to be able to get around your parental controls. And so these apps are happening all the time. Whisper, again, like another anonymous app where essentially you can say things about other people anonymously. Interesting thing about Yik Yak is it's purely geographic. So you have to be within 10 miles of whoever is posting in order to be able to see the things that are being posted by that person. It can be completely anonymous. Now, interestingly, Yik Yak is one of the only good partners that we found, at least in the school law community, because we deal with these cases all the time. They'll actually set up what's called a digital shield around your school building so that people can't access Yik Yak in your school. We get questions all the time from parents. Well, don't schools have things in place that are blocking my students on the Wi-Fi from accessing Facebook and doing these sorts of things? Sure. There may be a blocker in Hill Elementary as we sit here right now. But I've got 3G on my phone. I just sent out a tweet saying that I was happy to be presenting to all of you tonight. So it's again, what you kind of see as we go through these cases and talk about this new technology, it's really a cat and mouse game of you trying to keep up with what's happening with technology with your kids and them trying to stay ahead of you. I will posit to you that they are winning, and they're winning by quite a bit. That's even if you are up on all the new technology. So the intent here is really to give you that kind of information and to scare the kids that are here, and just to make sure that if you've got any questions about it, certainly ask, and we'll kind of go through some cases, and then what the legal consequences are in Nebraska. I mean, that's what we deal with. We'll get a call from a principal or a superintendent who will say, hey, we had this happen at school, or we had this happen and it turned into a fight at school, so what do? Kids were bullying each other on Facebook. There's a whole weird mix of legal questions that goes into that. To what extent is the school able to respond, if at all? To what extent do you get the parents involved? When do we have to call the cops? What should you do if it happens? So we get these questions all the time, and so if you have them, certainly ask. We see this a lot now on gaming platforms. I don't know if any of the students in here recognize you've got first-person shooters like Call of Duty, The Sims, My Life, all that kind of stuff that your kids might be doing either on the PlayStation Network or the Xbox Network, whatever it might be. It is just as easy to send a message in that network, which you probably aren't monitoring as regularly because you don't go think to check what messages your students or your kids are sending to their friends when they're playing games online together. But all of these different games have messaging functions, and they have private messaging functions, and they have ways that you can hide and delete what's happening. So I'll posit to you that it's not even just these apps and all this different technology. It's pretty much every time they're connected, every time they're being a digital citizen, these risks are present. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so all the time I get questions. Well, I don't really let my kid do it. Okay, thank you, sir. Do you know if your kid has a Twitter account? No, of course he doesn't. Do you know if your kid has a Facebook account? No, absolutely not. Student, I hate to embarrass you in front of your dad. Do you have a Twitter account? Yeah. How do you access it? Well, at school or on my friend's phone. Some information about how prevalent this stuff is, regardless of whether you think it's happening. This one is one of my favorites. There's more YouTube content uploaded to the internet in any 60-day period than the big three networks produced in the first 60 years of their existence. So if you think about how much digital content that is, it's a crazy amount. 95% of all teens are online. There may be one or two people in here whose teens truly may not be online. These numbers are not quite as high, but are trending upward definitely for elementary students. Now, Twitter, Facebook, technically speaking, you have to be 13 years old to have one of those pages. I don't know that it's not very difficult to get around it, and I know that really all you need to do is say, yeah, of course I have my parents' consent. And you can sign up for an email address. And believe me, your 8 and 9-year-olds can get on Gmail and sign up for an email address. Don't think that they can't. It happens all the time. They can sign up for multiple email addresses because they understand how this stuff works because they are digital citizens. This is nature to them, right? This is natural. You can tell stories about what you did when you were a kid playing different games. These are their stories. This is what they do. 70% of 12 and 13-year-olds have cell phones. 85% of all teens have cell phones. 81% of all teens have an active account on some form of social media. Surprises the heck out of some of these folks when we go to small town Nebraska and say, hey, your kids are doing this stuff. There's no way. Yes, way, it's happening. I think you're here. I'm seeing a lot of heads nod because you're here, right? You know it's happening. A lot of the folks that aren't here, probably some that need the message more than you do, are struggling with this idea and especially struggling with how to keep up with it. 91% of teens who use social media take, send, and receive photographs. Daily teen texting is up 200% in the last year, meaning they send text messages at least daily, and that's all teens. Yeah, question.
Have you found that a lot of students younger than 12 and 13 and teens are doing all this on their iPod?
Oh, absolutely.
That's what I thought, on their iTouch, because it can be used on Wi-Fi.
Sure.
Even if they're not taking the picture at home, they can take the picture on the way home from school, and then once they get home on the Wi-Fi, they'll post it?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. We had a situation where it was actually just an iPod. The student had essentially downloaded an app that they were using to send messages to people over the Wi-Fi on their iPod. And the parent had no idea that it was even Wi-Fi capable. But it was happening. It was happening at home. Kid puts the headphones in, looks like it's messing around on the iPod, cyberbullying one of his classmates. And of course, mom and dad were absolutely offended. We don't let our kid use the computer. He's 10 years old. Are you kidding me? No, because it's happening because they are ahead of you, okay? They're out ahead of you. They're finding ways to do this stuff. That's a good question because it's just the reality of what's happening out there. Okay, this is some interesting stuff. I don't know if any of you are on these things like Pinterest, YouTube, but this happens every minute of every day. And some of this stuff is insane. Let's see here. 204 million email messages sent every minute. 3,472 different images pinned on Pinterest every minute. And mind you, we have a work day and a school day, right? We're taking out 8 hours of it, for the most part. I'm guilty of Facebook at work. I know that it's just something that happens. Tinder, that app that I was telling you about, there are 416,667 people who are anonymously judged by their peers every minute. It's crazy, and it's happening. I wanted to put this in here more just to, if I haven't beaten the horse dead yet, here you go. Okay, so with the remaining time, we're going to get to cyberbullying, sexting, and then some tips on digital citizenship. I'm going to go through this stuff kind of quick now that we've had the obligatory 15 minutes of throat clearing and you're sufficiently scared and paying attention. Cyberbullying, the use of technology such as computers and especially, obviously, cell phones, or iPods, as you will, to engage in repeated and hostile behavior by an individual or group that is intended to harm others. Now, here's the interesting part, and I say this with a little bit of bias because I represent public schools. Bullying is a repeated activity, okay? So one mean message sent to a student from another student is not bullying. I tell you that, like I said, only because I want you to understand that bullying stuff, when we're talking about bullying, when we're talking about the stuff that where the cops will get involved, where the school will get involved because it meets the state's definition of bullying, we're talking about more repeated behavior. Okay, now, I will tell you also that if there's one mean message, that probably means that there are more. You just need to know where to look to find them. But that's what we mean when we talk about cyberbullying as a repeated series of conduct. How common is it? 95% of teens that are on social media that were surveyed admitted to seeing cyberbullying. 95%. Every student that is on social media has seen somebody else be bullied digitally. Now, it's crazy to me, but absolutely I think that is true. 66% of teens see others joining in, piling on. Why? Because it's really, really easy to be a tough guy behind a computer screen. It's difficult to be a tough guy in the playground when you have real punches. I mean, that's just the truth of it. 21% of teens, now this is great because teens are honest, I think, for the most part, when it comes to filling out these surveys. At least that's what the Pew Institute and all these people tell us, is that they believe they're getting honest answers here. 1 out of every 5 teens says, yeah, and when I see it happening, it's better for me to pile on than to try to say something to stop it, because then I'll become the victim of the cyberbullying if I do anything else. It's expected that teens pile on. We'll talk about a case here in a second where a bunch of people got in trouble only for clicking the like button on Facebook to something that one of their classmates was doing. 33% of teens admit to being a victim. So one out of every three students, one out of every of your three students has most likely been a victim of cyberbullying of some variety. 60% are girls. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I know that junior high girls can be awfully mean to each other. I am a new parent of a girl who was born about 3 weeks ago, and so now I have skin in the game, so this stuff scares the crap out of me. Again, these are just the stats that we're getting, and a lot of this polling has started more recently because the phenomenon, to the extent that it's really smashed into the public school setting in areas where we can poll students, has been more of it's been studied more recently than it ever was in the past. 5% of all teens surveyed said that they would try to help. You're not going to beat the problem that way. You're expecting that your teens will do the right thing because there's a lot of pressure on them, even if you think you've raised them to do the right thing. And I'm certain that you have. They just have too many outside pressures from those folks that are doing this to actually want to step up and do something about it. You're volunteering to become the victim of cyberbullying if you're one of the ones that asks to step up. Now, we absolutely encourage that, right? The easiest way to stop this stuff is to shed daylight on it, is to have somebody step in and say, don't do this. If your kid is a thought leader and says, absolutely, this shouldn't happen, I'm going to notify the principal. That's the quickest way to stop this stuff when it's started. The easiest way to prevent it, as we'll talk about later, is to be fully involved in your students' use of digital technology and things like that. But until this number goes up, we're sort of fighting a growing problem, right? And that's the message that we're giving to kids when we're out there presenting to them. How crazy is this? Now you tell me what percentage, how many parents got the flyer about this presentation. Now they don't know me from Adam. I probably wouldn't come watch me speak, but this was shocking to me that when they surveyed the parents of these students, there are about 5,000 of them, 5,000 students that were surveyed, so a lot of parents. 7% said that they were concerned about cyberbullying. Now, maybe they just meant they didn't know if that was about their student or in general, but only 7%. So you can see the disconnect between the number of students that are affected by this and the concern level among their parents. Now, that's no indictment of them, right? Because a lot of this stuff is difficult to even know that it's happening. But we've got a real problem, and I think this is probably the root of it. Here's the cartoon I was telling you about. Right? Because it's easy to watch two people hit each other on the playground. It's really easy to find out when that's happening. A fight in the lunchroom. We can figure that out. Hair pulling after junior high volleyball practice. That we've got our hands around. We know what's happening with that stuff. Kids sending dirty messages and mean messages to each other at night when they're left to their own devices or when they're hanging out with their friends at a slumber party is significantly more difficult for us to track down. It's a universal problem. It's one that we're going to grapple with forever because this stuff isn't going away. You've seen the usage figures. Just some interesting stuff about cyberbullying versus bullying. And I think a lot of this makes sense intuitively why we're seeing it so much more in general. You can do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There's no place to go. You can't run to the principal when you're sitting with your friends at Dairy Queen and somebody's sending you nasty messages. It's shared by a wide audience. We'll talk about Twitter cases where people are getting sued because of things they're retweeting on Twitter. It can be anonymous. I think this is one of the significantly more difficult aspects of this, is so much of this technology allows you to be anonymous. No geographical limitations. And the target can easily become the bully, right? Because in the natural course of you're a foot taller than me and you're hitting me, that's difficult. That defines itself. But when anybody can start to use mean and nasty words, it's much more difficult to monitor them what's happening. So oftentimes we will see the person that was initially not instigating becomes the person that's first investigated because they're just responding in the way that they've learned how through cyberbullying. This is a case in Nebraska. TMT 323 is sitting at home on parents' home computer. They have a Mac. Diva Girl, her classmate, hey loser, watch your back. TMT 323, what are you talking about? Why don't you kill yourself while you're ahead? TMT, why can't you just leave me alone? Diva Girl, ugly girls like you need to be put in their place. We got this in an email. This is a screenshot of what happened on a computer in western Nebraska. We got this in an email from the administrator who called and said, hey, I just sent you an email. We had this, this is 2007 maybe, I think 2008. So it was one of the first real chat cases that we dealt with, or that we know about. So the principal is on the phone with one of the attorneys, Karen Haase from our office, and is saying, hey, this happened. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I understand it happened at night. It was 2 of the students. I know who the students are. They both admitted to having the conversation. Because of the way that school's jurisdiction to impose consequences on students works, and because we knew that this was a brief conversation that happened outside of the school area, outside of the school activities, it wasn't on a school vehicle, wasn't on school grounds, there was nothing that the school could do. So Karen from our office said, well, and Mom was livid. Mom was mad. So she said, you know what, you could go talk to your county attorney. So Mom goes and talks to the county attorney. County attorney gets so mad that this is happening and says, our judge will never go for this. They file a juvenile case in the county. The judge, or the parent of Diva Girl and Diva Girl are brought into court in front of a judge. They're standing there in juvenile court. The judge says, what do you have to say for yourself? Diva Girl says, can anybody guess? I was just kidding. Come on, right? I'm a 13-year-old girl. I am capable of all sorts of evil. This is nothing. And the judge says, you know what? Because think of who the judge is, right? The judge is a 63-year-old guy who has no idea what we're talking about when we say iChat, and is looking at this, and all he can see is, how can you be so terrible? You're telling somebody to go kill themselves. The judge says, I don't know if you violated a criminal law, but here's what we're going to do. You, Diva Girl, are going to be taken away from the custody of your parents for 6 months. You are going to become a ward of the state. You're going to go live in a foster home. You're going to do community service. A 13-year-old girl, you're going to do community service. We're going to have all sorts of fun stuff that you're going to do to teach you to never do this stuff again. Oh, and by the way, Mom, if this happens again, you're going to be prosecuted for failure to supervise your child. This conversation right here, this is the full extent of it, happened at 8 p.m., probably lasted all of about 15 seconds. They're in court, daughter's made a ward of the court, and to this day it still has a record which, maybe will be expunged when they turn 18, but craziness, right? So this is the reaction that we first get from Nebraska. So as a result, we start to see more of these cases pop up. Here's one, Boston versus Doe. This is from Georgia. Students of Miss Alex Doe here, or Miss Alex Boston, created what is called a fat book profile, a spoof profile about one of their classmates, which essentially was her 12-year-old classmates. They took her picture and blew it up to make her look fat. They had all sorts of interesting and creative stuff for 12-year-olds. Languages she spoke: sluttish, retardish, whorish. So these are all listed, because on Facebook you can put what languages you speak. These are all listed on the Facebook profile. Hobbies: drugs, sex, being a whore. Fake stories about her, made up stories about her going to meet boys that they named from their school in the parking lot so that she could perform oral sex on them. They created YouTube videos and posted them on this page about her doing and saying stupid things. So there was like these off-camera videos when somebody was pretending to be Alex Boston. They go to the school and they say, school, what are you going to do? This is happening. Mostly, I think, because parents really don't know exactly what else to do. Right? Do you call the cops? What are the cops going to do? They've got limited resources. Do they really want to be tracking down mean 13-year-old girls when they're chasing true sex offenders and drug dealers around the streets? So what do you do? In this case, they went to the school. The school said this all happened off school grounds. We have no indication that anybody accessed this profile from inside the school, which at that point was probably pretty inaccurate, right? Because I'm sure I could pull it up on my phone right now on Facebook on 3G if I wanted to. But the concept is the school did not believe that it had jurisdiction to impose any consequences, much like a school in Nebraska might not. So Alex Boston's parents decided to sue her classmates and their parents. Sued them for $1 million. Said, essentially, look what they're doing, Judge, to my daughter. It caused her severe emotional distress. She's embarrassed. She hasn't been able to go to work or to school. Essentially, help us. Give us some relief here. As soon as the insurance companies got hold of it, it settled out of court. So this is the first time that we have an insurance company saying, you parents and you kids who are engaging in this stuff, I think you're going to lose these lawsuits. Now, insurance companies generally don't give up their money that easily, And my understanding, because this was a private settlement, is that this settled for more than what we call nuisance value. Right? This was a substantial amount of money that changed hands because of the things that these students, these kids, were doing on Facebook by creating this fake page. Some other examples. This is the case that I was telling you about. This is from Seattle, Washington. Students liked a Facebook page, so it was a fake page created much like the Alex Boston page. Students went in, and you know how you can like a page that's created if it's a business page or something like that? Well, students went in and liked the page. So they go to the school, parents take it to the school, where we do find out that there were kids accessing the page in school. And for every single person that created the page, and every person that liked the page, the school suspended them. These are high school students. So all these high school students said, whoa, I've got First Amendment rights, and I have a right to say what I want, and I can exercise those rights. I don't shed my constitutional rights when I walk into the schoolhouse doors. The judge said, you know what? No. Upheld all of their suspensions from school. So I think these were just a couple of days out of school, but then the real problem here was these were activity suspensions. The roster on the volleyball team went down precipitously after these suspensions. So though, of course, those parents sued and went to federal court after their princesses had liked this Facebook page. And the judge says, you know what? No, this is ridiculous. It doesn't matter if you actually wrote the words and created the page. If you liked it, right, if you gave your endorsement to the page, that's the same thing as you saying this, exactly what it said anyway. So this is a case where we actually have a federal court saying, yes, it takes mere participation. It takes liking something on Facebook to be just as guilty as the person that created the page in the first place. Memphis, Tennessee, I call this the odds maker case. This was an honors student. So truly, one of the thought leaders, one of the smarter people in school, I believe, had a scholarship to go to some Ivy League school. She was suspended for 180 days for commenting on a friend's status. So what did she comment on? One of her classmates said to another classmate, come on Facebook, wrote a comment on her page, come meet me outside after school so you and I can settle this like real women. She comments on the comment that her friend had made, comments and says, hey, Susie, I've got my money on you. Parents of the girl who were threatened, the girl that was threatened, her parents went to the school and said, hey, clearly this is happening on school grounds, right? If we're saying on Facebook, come meet me after school. So they say, you know what, you're right. They suspend the girl who made the comment. They also suspend the honor student. And they say to the honor student, you saying that, you participating in that level of bullying violates our policy. You too are going to have this 180-day social suspension, which meant she couldn't go to prom, couldn't participate in track, may potentially have lost her scholarship to this Ivy League school because they had a character and morality clause in her application which said she had to update it. Go into court, she says, Judge, I was just kidding. I'm no different than an odds maker, right? All I was saying is I think she has a statistically greater chance of beating her up. The judge says, no, I don't think so. Upholds this. So now she's an 18-year-old student who has this on her record, that she was suspended from school, who has her name on a lawsuit that she lost, and may or may not have gotten into her Ivy League school because of making one little comment about who she thought would win a fight on Facebook. Okay, so in Nebraska, we actually have a statute which covers bullying. As we talked, it's an ongoing pattern of physical, verbal, or electronic abuse. These 79s right here, these are the statutes that govern schools. So they intend this to be, to basically give the schools the authority to impose consequences when this bullying or cyberbullying, what have you, is happening. Loss of extracurricular privileges. There is no right to play sports. There is no right to be in band. There is no right to be in the play. You have a right to go to class. So the school can't take away your ability to go to class unless they have jurisdiction to do so. But the school can tell you that you're not going to participate in track or go to prom whenever they want. Most parents don't understand that. Most of the times we get parents fighting back against schools not because the kid was taken out of class for 5 days, but because district wrestling is this weekend. That's just the reality of it. But schools, when they impose these consequences, there really aren't a lot of things that parents can do to fight them. Detention, loss of recess, any of those in-school things, if you will, extra assignments, things like that. Certainly no suspending or expelling or assigning to an alternative school unless it meets the other statutory definitions of what is subject to consequence in Nebraska. But we have seen cyberbullying cases where all of this has happened. Civil consequences, we talked a little bit about it.
Could you just repeat
Sure.
real quick? You said colleges can have what kind of a character?
Sure, so colleges will often have, it's a character clause, a character and morality clause, if you will, especially private schools that don't receive state funds to operate or federal funds. They can have clauses which essentially say, what have you done which makes it look like you're immoral? And in the case of that, the odds maker student, that was one of the things that likely would have triggered because, for example, have you ever been suspended from school, expelled, any of those things? I think they're common on applications now anyway, but especially when they're hooked into these morality clauses. So yeah, absolutely. College applications, that stuff doesn't go away. They know what to ask for. They know how to separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will, and find the good students. So real consequences. Homeowners insurance in some cases has covered this. The case of Alex Boston, the parents' homeowners insurance for the other girls did cover. Because there is no my student's a bully insurance, right? So you have to have some insurance which covers it. And in this case, it's mostly homeowners insurance. There have been money judgments. $750,000 we've seen for a student that threatened to kill another student, such that the student that was threatened to be killed had such bad psychological consequences that they're pretty much on counseling indefinitely, had to go to a different school. Crazy stuff. It was actually a judge, I think in Utah, that said, yeah, that stuff's not going to fly here. Your kid's not going to do that. As a consequence, what happened in that case? Home foreclosure. Because the judgment was against the students and the parents. They literally foreclosed on their home because there was a mechanism, as there is in Nebraska, to foreclose on the property of anybody against whom a judgment is entered. So real, true consequences. Injunctions and restraining orders against kids. Yeah.
So on a lot of these that go to court, it sounds like the judges are finding in favor of the victims, which is a good thing. Have there been cases where it's like, oh man, that seemed to went wrong, and the judge said, well, no, I think they have some rights, or First Amendment does protect them, it goes the other way.
Absolutely. In fact, we've got, so in the federal courts, not our Nebraska state courts specifically, but in federal courts, that's a great question. There's a pretty big split down the middle right now as to whether these judgments will stand up, or whether schools who want to impose consequences on students for comments that they make off school grounds are able to do so. Now in Nebraska, we actually have a Student Discipline Act in state law, which requires for a school, for example, to impose suspension, expulsion, or reassignment. It has to happen on school grounds, at a school vehicle, in a school activity. So in Nebraska, we have a state statutory jurisdictional question, but generally for states that don't, the federal courts are split right down the middle as to whether things that kids say off school grounds can be subject to consequence at school. And likewise, in those states, it's obviously much more likely that their courts are finding that parents and students can be guilty, for example, for intentional infliction of emotional distress, for slander, for libel, all those sorts of things that are generally tough to prove, but become really easy to prove, and all you have to do is print off a Facebook page. So there is a split nationally on that, but generally we're seeing judges be more favorable toward especially the bad case victims. The facts of every case are different, right? But generally there are courts that are definitely favorable. We have 8th Circuit cases, which is our federal court, which have kind of gone both ways, but generally I don't think Nebraska would find a money judgment like that, at least not right now. Was there another question? Yeah.
So when they're investigating it, then they're able to find out whether something was posted at a certain time and the student was in attendance at school that day.
Right.
Is that what they look into?
Yeah.
They tell when those Facebook likes were posted and things like that, so that they know whether the school has jurisdiction over it?
They can, and interestingly, even if the student disables those functions, Facebook, if they're sent a subpoena by the plaintiff's attorney, has all that information from their back-end server. So even if the student doesn't necessarily have a record of when that page was liked, Facebook has been subpoenaed. They should probably be added to that little stat wheel because they get subpoenaed all the time for those sorts of records. Yeah, good questions. Okay, we've got 3 lawsuits. I know I'm kind of running short on time here. They've got 3 lawsuits here. We know 3 that are currently pending, 2 in Texas, and 1, I think, because Alex Boston was settled. I'm not for sure where the Sedgwick one was. But again, pending lawsuits, just like we were talking about. These 2 are in the fifth Judicial Circuit, and I think this one's in the 4th Circuit. We expect that these two are going to be decided the opposite from that one. And we may actually have one of these cases go to the Supreme Court because the lower federal courts can't agree on what the law actually is. Yeah?
What about the teen that committed suicide by jumping off the top of, or hanging herself off the top of the elevator? Is that one like that?
That is not. This Sedgwick case is a suicide case, but I don't think it's that one. When I say I mean the general school law community had a page which was essentially tracking the number of suicides. We were up to 28, I think, suicides as a result of cyberbullying, and that was, probably a year ago already. So that one may well have gone to a civil litigation, but I'm not exactly sure.
I was just wondering because I saw it for 48 hours or something,
Yeah.
and there was nothing she could do.
Mm-hmm.
There
Yeah.
was no law to protect her.
Absolutely, and it's difficult. And again, it's the result of, as happens so often, the law really lags behind technology because the law takes forever to develop, right? If you file a lawsuit today, by the time you get to the Supreme Court, you're 8 years later. So we've got some of these cases which may eventually get there, but it's just lagging so far behind. So you have states like Nebraska who are enacting these statutes. They're now the most current craze, and I'll see if I've got it, yeah. So we've got terroristic threat laws in Nebraska, but these Rebecca's laws, Rebecca was, and maybe that's the case, I can't remember, but this was a very high-profile suicide of a girl by the name of Rebecca who committed suicide because it was a combination of sexting and cyberbullying, had sent out pictures of herself and then was therefore bullied because there were naked pictures of her floating around school. So Wisconsin, Virginia, and a couple other states now have Rebecca's laws, which essentially say if you engage in bullying or cyberbullying, and I don't care where it is, you are guilty of a misdemeanor. So I expect that something like that will be introduced in Nebraska eventually, but this is the result of the fact that if you take a case to a civil lawsuit, it's going to take so long to get resolution. So now we have state legislatures who are doing things like passing Rebecca's laws. In Nebraska, the one that we've seen used the most is the terroristic threat law. That's actually a class 4 felony. We have teenagers who have been charged with this law, or with terroristic threats. If you are convicted of a class 4 felony, you can spend 5 years in prison or pay a $10,000 fine. State v. Murphy was a case. An 18-year-old boy who was still in high school broke up with his girlfriend. The girlfriend broke up with him because her family didn't like him. I think it'll be pretty easy to see why. When they broke up, he said he was going to beat the heck out of a lot of people, would be killing a lot of people, told his girlfriend's sister that he didn't want to end up killing his ex-girlfriend. Parents called the cops and said, hey, he's making these posts on MySpace. We have no idea what to do. Right? It's not like the cops are scouring MySpace to find this stuff. So the cops go and investigate, and they say, oh, you're 18? Interesting. You're now charged with a felony, terroristic threats. This case eventually pled down from a felony, but it's the first case that we know of in Nebraska. I think it was from 3 or 4 years ago now, where somebody who was engaged in these sorts of cyberbullying or these threat-making behaviors was charged with terroristic threats. Okay, here's the Twitter case, which I'll get to in a second. Okay, so this one was, and I'll just kind of breeze through it. This one was a student changing after volleyball practice. A bunch of her teammates and friends came in and held her down while she was naked, took pictures of her, put those pictures up on Twitter. And so what happened when the boys who had just gotten done with football practice found the pictures? Woo, they are all over, right? Everybody has retweeted this. These naked pictures of her are up for over an hour before a report eventually gets to Twitter, who takes them down because they're obviously pornographic. The family in this case sued Twitter because they have no way of preventing these sorts of pictures from going up, and they should, was their argument. Sued the school district, sued the student who took the picture, sued every single student. This is a huge lawsuit. Every single student that retweeted that picture. Near as we know right now, Twitter was dismissed and the school district was dismissed, but for different grounds. Because instead of suing the school, they sued the volleyball coach who has immunity in Nebraska, but kind of a different deal. The student who took the picture and the students who tweeted it out, much like those Facebook-like cases, they were not allowed to dismiss the lawsuit outright. So when there was a motion to dismiss filed by all of their attorneys, the judge said, no. That lawsuit has at least a chance to go on to the next step before we would ever throw it out of court. So obviously all of them are named in a federal lawsuit. Their names are in the paper. Everybody that just retweeted this picture that was taken at volleyball practice. We've got, you'll never believe this one, sleepover drama among 11-year-olds. 4 11-year-old girls were at a slumber party. One girl was not invited. Hard feelings. Didn't go well for the girl who wasn't invited. So the girls at the slumber party FaceTimed this girl to rub it in. Because you just can't quite make this stuff up. So they get on FaceTime on their phones, and they FaceTime this other girl who wasn't invited and say, "Nana, nana, nana, you weren't invited." You know, they're doing the whole song and dance. They exchange text messages, social media use. The girl who wasn't invited stewed on it overnight, posted a picture on Twitter of a gun, and said, "I'm going to kill the 4th one slowly," who was the girl who did the inviting to the slumber party, "so she can watch the others die." Girls were pretty freaked out, had no idea what to do. Here's what they did because they couldn't do anything. We were talking about the efforts of the drug abuse, alcohol abuse, education stuff. They thought they held what amounted to a town hall meeting and said, you know what? Cyberbullying, just as much as drugs or alcohol, belongs in the DARE program. So they now added a 3rd tenet to their DARE program in this community to add cyberbullying. Ask.fm, this is another suicide case. This is you can do this completely anonymously. Somebody poses a question and other people are able to answer the question anonymously. So you can imagine the sorts of things that people can make up when the question is Virginia a slut? Right? Yeah.
And if your kids have an Instagram account, they almost always have this Ask FM connected to the Instagram account. So when you click on their app, it's right below. When their page comes up, you just click on that, and then you can see all the questions and answers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quick question.
Who asks those questions?
Huh?
Who asks the questions on that? Do you know that? Like, we actually just had a family incident in our house just last week. And I had no idea what it was. She had a friend, there was a question asked, and they answered her name. Mm-hmm. And she was upset, and I said, I don't know what this is, you need to show it to me, pull me up. And she does. And we go to Ask FM, and I'm like, how do you do this? But the questions on Ask FM are very leading, rude, mean.
Yeah.
Who asks the question?
Other kids.
Yep, anybody that has it. Any other kid that has the app.
You type in a question and then you send it to a friend and they answer it?
Anybody can see the question. My understanding is as the app is used, anybody that has it, that is friends with that person can see it.
So do we know who asked the question?
Not necessarily.
No, they're anonymous unless their name is attached to it. I would say most of the ones my daughter gets are all anonymous.
Yeah.
So when you say that there's an Instagram account and that they almost always have that, where do you see it?
Okay, so you click on their Instagram, that app, and then their account comes up and there's their profile. It's right below their profile. Mm-hmm. And almost every single kid has it, and I've not been able to figure it out, but my daughter can hide it from me.
She probably
and then
has
when
proof.
I threaten to take the phone, the ask comes back up. So, and I haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you have a question?
You can block people on Instagram, so only your friends see your stuff. Is that also?
I don't know if your ask is locked.
Here's the interesting
Your
thing.
Pictures are locked.
They oftentimes will piggyback off each other, right? Because this ask gets credibility by hooking into Instagram, much like every Facebook page you go to says log in to comment through Facebook, right? Or share through Facebook. They have those little buttons. It's the same concept. From my experience, we do not necessarily know whether they will comply with Instagram's terms of use in terms of blocking people. So they very well could just be blocked from the Instagram created and hosted content, but not the ask content.
Yeah.
Is this a separate app?
It can be.
It can be an app, but it can also be an Instagram.
I've never seen it separate.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Like my daughter, all of her friends have it. Like I've never seen an Instagram account without it.
without it? Okay.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah, question.
I have a question. We have an incident at our house where, like, we have iPhones, and so, like, everything's under my account.
Yeah.
So if they want to get an app, they have to have my password, which they don't have.
Sure.
So they have to say, Mom, can I get this? I have to type in my password. But my son has an iPad, and I happen to be looking at something else, kind of doing a stocking thing, I was looking at something else, and all of a sudden a Snapchat pops up. Well, I never okayed a Snapchat account.
Yeah.
I said, where did this come from? And he, of course, is like,
So your kid.
I don't know how that,
He
He's
goes,
created
well,
it.
I just learned about it at school.
He
I
could,
figured it out.
two things. He could have created his own account. I don't know how old your son is, but he very well could have hacked his phone or his iPad, his device, to take somebody else's cloud deposited data and put it onto his. Happens frequently. So doesn't need your password because he can what's called hijack his phone, change the inner working so he doesn't need your password to transfer somebody else's cloud data to his phone. See celebrity nude photos.
Is this the whole poof thing that you're talking about?
No, not necessarily. Poof is an app you have to download or steal from somebody else, like Snapchat.
He said something like, because I said, no, you gotta explain to me how you did this. And he said, I went on a website, they talk about it at school, and you can get it without your parents'
You
permission.
learned this at school?
Oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they
Not from school, people. No.
From
Yes. For those of you watching this later, there is not a class in Lincoln Public Schools which teaches this. No, that's a great question. Yes, absolutely.
And they said, oh, your mom won't okay it because Max wanted it.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, no, you want, and so then.
How does some random guy in Siberia get nude pictures of Jennifer Lawrence? Because this stuff, it's eventually the people that are imposing the technology barriers in it are behind the people who are making up the ways around it. That's just the truth of the matter. And it makes you want to pull your hair out, and my daughter is going to be locked in her room until she's 30.
And why is Snapchat scary?
Snapchat is scary, and we'll get to it in a second here when we get into sexting, because that is ephemeral. That is, picture lasts for 10 seconds and it's gone. It's not gone, but it's gone in terms of that's what your kids think, so they use it to sext. Yeah.
What app for, we have a 11-year-old. Okay, so what app is easiest for us to monitor and for them to use just?
We'll get to that. I've got a slide on it. It's actually a pretty new piece of technology, which Snapchat calls the nuclear option for parenting. Snapchat hates it, right? Because their whole sell to your kids at 99 cents a pop is that your parents can't track what you do on it. We'll get to it in a second. I've got a slide up on it, I promise. We'll cruise through this stuff pretty quickly. Kick Messenger, one student asks all these questions. Why aren't you dead? Why shouldn't you die? Very similar to Ask, right? Can be done completely anonymously. Kick Messenger is a terrible digital player. They do not let you get access to anything. They keep it completely anonymous. Does not matter what you do. Does not matter how much schools have threatened to call law enforcement on them. So anyway, this student asks, this particular student over here, or asks a question on Kick Messenger, why aren't you dead? Why shouldn't you die? Why don't you kill yourself? She kills herself. This girl gets back on and says, yeah, I know I bullied Rebecca. And she killed herself, but I don't give a. Because, why? Why would somebody possibly do that? Because they know it has to be anonymous. They know that this is the one that fights the hardest to keep anonymity. Otherwise, why would you possibly say, yeah, of course I know she killed herself. Now, she never attached her name to it, but this is the sort of cover that students think they have when we're using these apps that don't play ball with parents and schools and police in terms of turning over this information. It happens. Tons of cases. We got cases in Nebraska from Kick Messenger. Yeah.
Did you say Kick is something that kids use because they know their parents have a deal where they can see their text messages that are just regular texting, and so they go to this instead?
Kick is free, okay? Kick is a free app. It's great. You think, oh, I don't have to pay for text messaging, right? Because my kid has a way of chatting with friends. It can be completely anonymous. This is the only app that I was talking about. Karen Haase in our office. She has a teenage daughter who just graduated from Southwest, who's now going to Hastings. This is the one app she would not allow her to have, even as an 18-year-old, just because it is crazy. They don't play ball. They let anything go, including stuff like this. Question.
So there's no way that like Facebook can have a timestamp or can kind of track you? There's nothing? They don't have anything that they can't track cookies, something and get them?
They do, and Kick is similar to Yik Yak, which just came up. My experience has been, if you've had a different one, my experience has been that unless law enforcement have an active criminal case and they have the subpoena power of a federal or state court, Kick will not cooperate with a civil lawsuit subpoena. They will not cooperate with a general law enforcement request, much like even Facebook will now, until there is a criminal charge filed, which means you have to know your defendant, right? So if a company like Kick sets their privacy settings such that we'll never disclose your information unless and until you're charged in a criminal lawsuit, but you can do it anonymously, how are you ever going to be charged in a criminal lawsuit? They have a perfect little circle of keeping things private, and that's how they like it. Oh, sure. Somebody will sue Kick Messenger under the theory that their daughter had Kick Messenger and killed herself. Now, the question is, generally speaking, they're not going to disclose things in this. It would take a federal judge telling Kick Messenger, I don't care how hard you kick and scream, no pun intended, you're going to play ball. You're going to give this information up. I do not yet, as of today, know of any court or any law enforcement branch other than a named defendant in a criminal lawsuit that's had success getting Kick to disclose that information. Every other, even Snapchat has. Kick won't. Yeah.
So, anything that she sends comes to our iPad. If she had something like this, would those text messages show up on the iPad or only on that device? Maybe, maybe not. I've never played, most of these apps I've downloaded and played around with just so I know how they work. I've never really tried Kick Messenger, mostly because I'm afraid of it, but generally, possibly, but it would depend on the sort of software that you had that was out botting around for that information. So not everything we put on one thing, even if I have it sharing on 2 devices, it doesn't mean that it's automatically sharing. Absolutely not. Even if there was an app that said, we'll make it do this, your student can Google how to hack their phone or their device and figure out how to stop it from doing that.
Once you log out of Kick, you see the login website.
Yeah, there you go.
See,
What?
So he's heard, when you log out of Kick, it wipes everything off.
Yeah, you can only have it on one device.
So then it's only
once
on
you
that
log out,
device.
log back in, and everything's-
That makes sense.
it's the same one you just leaned over and said all your parents are still following on the stop button.
I'm not making this up. Yeah. Well, okay, so it's almost 8 o'clock. I've got sexting stuff and kind of some general pointer stuff. I was scheduled to go till 8:30, so that's why I put a lot of this content in. If you need to leave. I know that they're going to have, obviously, the audio and video recording of it, and I'll get the slides to you. But I think it's good. I love getting these questions because it's information that you need to have. So we'll just continue in the Q&A / going through this stuff. But if you want to leave, right? I'm here as long as you need me. So, okay. Yik Yak. This is what Yik Yak looks like. Similar sort of device. You can post just anonymous things. Crazy stuff. For example, somebody celebrating the Rest in Peace Nelson Mandela only had 311 people liked it. But the kid that said, sometimes when I get too lazy to go to the bathroom, I pee out my window, all my neighbors have seen my penis, that young man had 343 likes. So, again, this is how this works. Yik Yak is generally limited. It's like an anonymous Twitter post or Facebook post to users within 5 to 10 miles of, depending on the settings, of the person using it. Now, Yik Yak is good because they will play ball with schools. They will set up a digital barrier so that this you have to have your geographic location stuff on to use it, or unless you can hack around it. But it can be blocked at school. Obviously, they are not going to come block it at your house. So again, this stuff is happening. But Yik Yak will play ball. So at least in terms of the criminal context that we've seen. In Massachusetts, kids are making bomb threats on Yik Yak. In Alabama, a student was arrested after cops traced a bomb threat directly back to his phone because the cops actually said, we got a bomb threat. If you want us to go to the federal court and get a warrant against your servers and come pick them up and haul them out of the Yik Yak offices, we'd be happy to do so. Or you can tell us whose phone this came from. They were willing to play ball. Same thing in Illinois and Georgia, cyberbullying of classmates, multiple threats of suicide made. Once it hit that level, Yik Yak said, okay, we're in the game of anonymity, but we're no Kick Messenger, so we'll play ball a little bit. So this, in general, they're better, but you got to jump through quite a few hoops just to get them to say whose phone did that anonymous message come from. But because you have to use the geographic tracking data and all that they can track on the back end at Yik Yak. Rumor confession accounts. We talked about a couple of them, the fake Facebook pages. These are all the rage now. Have you heard of some of these, students? Anybody heard of these rumor confession accounts where you can send a message to somebody who will then post it? Oh yeah. We had them, there was a Southeast Nebraska high school rumor message account. Well, essentially what happens is some enterprising young adult sets up a page on Twitter, which is, for example, Nebraska high school rumors. I'm very proud of my 370-ish Twitter followers. This accumulated 1,487 followers in 10 hours. So essentially what kids will do is somebody will set up an anonymous Twitter feed, and they will send messages out to all of their friends through this anonymous feed and say, hey, I got the sweetest idea ever. None of our parents want us to know that we're doing this stuff, and they're not going to let us have the Yik Yak app, and they're definitely not going to let us have Kick Messenger. So instead, I think what we'll do is we'll just use Twitter to create that barrier of privacy by setting up an account which you, as the end user, can send a message to, and this new private account will post a message. So for example, my wife is from Milford. The Southeast Nebraska High School Rumors page had something on it which said, girls from Milford have the nicest butts. She told me that truth is the ultimate defense, and that they do, and that I couldn't get those kids in trouble because that's the truth. That's a serious story, by the way. One I'm not going to tell my daughter. But no, the concept is I have a Twitter account, which my parents know that I have. They monitor it. But what I do is I send and then immediately delete a direct message to the person who runs Nebraska High School Rumors. They take what I posted, knowing full well that it's from me, but they'll never post my name with it, and post what I wanted to say. So I know last Friday Sarah had sex with Tommy at Centennial Public Schools, instantly goes up on Nebraska High School Rumors. Nobody has any idea where it came from. Now the good news is that the enterprising young adults that create these pages are generally pretty proud of them. So the way that we found it is you get your thought leaders in school and the people who would respond to cyberbullying to figure out who it is that's running them, and then when you sit that student down and say, okay, John, let's have a chat about Nebraska High School Rumors. That's how you kind of get to those, but nonetheless, there's stuff that's being put up there, and of course, it'll happen from time to time. We had one in western Nebraska where kids passed around the login information. So it was never just one person that was running the rumor account. It went from different, for example, even to different schools. It essentially became like an underground mail sort of thing where they would always be far enough ahead of administrators and parents that it'd never get caught. So again, you're saying, oh, I'll let my kid have Twitter, but certainly not Yik Yak. Well, you can do functionally the same thing. Right? Exactly. And would just punch each other in the face on the playground and be done with it. Okay. Any questions about cyberbullying? We got 25 minutes left, and I can go all night, right? My alternative here is to go change poopy diapers. So unless there are other questions about cyberbullying, I'll move on to sexting, which is everybody's favorite. Okay, very good. Sorry, I don't know if you saw this. I could see my dad saying this, absolutely. Okay, so what is sexting? I'm sure everybody has a general idea, but basically you combine sex and texting in some form or fashion, or sex and Snapchatting. But essentially you take these photos and you share them with somebody else. The idea is not that complicated. This one I love. I will posit to you that this is essentially the cartoon that inspired Nebraska's sexting laws, but we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so how common is sexting? Oh, I love this one. I go through my how common is sexting stuff, we'll go through in a second, and I am down in Diller Odell Public Schools. And a guy from the audience raises his hand and says, hold on a second now. You're telling me that it's my job to prevent my 13-year-old son that loves to go outside in front of all the neighbors, drop his pants and pee in the front yard from taking a picture of himself and sending it to somebody. How am I ever going to stop that? He didn't have that sort of judgment. Yeah, exactly. Parent. I don't know what, there's no answer for it, right? And then half the time they can hide it. So it's, craziness. How many times have teens sent sexually suggestive photos? How crazy is this? 1 out of 5 12 to 14-year-olds has sent a sexually suggestive photo. This was, again, from the Pew Institute, and this is tens of thousands of students that they surveyed. They ruled out, got your margin of error. This is a statistically significant guess as to how many 12 to 14-year-olds have sent sex messages, actual photos. 30% of all teenagers, which I think it's higher than that, 31% of teens admitted to having asked others for pictures. 60% have been asked for pictures. Teens who sext, based on survey responses, were anywhere between 4 to 7 times more likely to actually hook up with somebody. It's sort of like once you've gotten yourself to the point of, okay, I'll send a nude picture of myself, then getting together to get to third base is suddenly not as big of a deal. Absolutely, the stats and the experiences that we've had with kids who were sexting, then getting caught at drama practice in the back room, they definitely correspond. I think this is true. Okay, these are just sexually suggestive messages. 40% of all teens, I think it's way higher than that. These were not honest teens. 38% of girls, 40% of boys, 50% of teens is that they have received sexting photos or messages. That not necessarily were involved in them, but 1 out of every 2 teens has received something like this according to the data. Obviously varies by geography, but generally speaking, look at your neighbor, look in the mirror, one of your kids has or will likely receive some sort of sext. And again, I posit to you that it's probably much higher than this. Teens that sext, 77% of them have sex. Teens that don't, 42%. Now, a little bit crazy to me that 42% of all teens have sex, but probably not that crazy when you think about what they're willing to take pictures of and send to somebody else. But yeah, obviously almost double. If you're willing to sext, you're probably more likely to hook up with somebody after you do so. This is just in the last 30 days. This was a survey of, you can see, about 2,500, or about 5,000 students, just shy of that. Sent naked or semi-naked pictures of myself to others at least once in the previous 30 days. Almost 10%. Almost 1 in 10 in the last month has sent one of these pictures. Received, 16% and almost 10% between male and female. Now, obviously, who's asking for these pictures? Right? That's the blue line. That's the male line. That, I think, corresponds with probably the nature of how things are. I was once a teenage boy. So, generally speaking, this is a problem that's happening. It's happening all the time. Don't hide from it. Don't pretend it's not happening. If you haven't had the birds and the bees talk, that's fine, but don't pretend this isn't happening. Okay, we say this to parents all the time, and they say, holy crap, my daughter's 12 years old. I say, yep, and you can stop her from being a statistic so that she's not one of these survey responses I'm talking about. My daughter was born 3 weeks ago. She'll be 12 in about 30 days. So I'm scared right along with you. Snapchat. Who knows what Snapchat is? Quite a few? Good. You'll never forget it after we talk about it. Snapchat allows you to take out your phone, take a picture or video of anything you want. You can add drawings to it. You can turn yourself into Ron Burgundy from Anchorman. You can, doesn't matter, there's absolutely no filter for pornographic videos or pictures. You could take a picture of yourself in the mirror completely nude, add a caption to it, thought you'd like this, and send it to a boyfriend or girlfriend in about 30 seconds, probably less. With Snapchat, you can decide anywhere from 3 to 10 seconds how long somebody is going to be able to see the video that you send to them. So when Snapchat, who by the way is worth about $10 billion now, because it's all the craze, and a heavy majority of their users are under the age of 30. But anyway, so essentially you take the picture, you decide how long the recipient has to look at it, and then according to Snapchat, it vanishes. So if you go to the App Store and look at Snapchat, they will advertise, they will posit to you that the picture will vanish. Snapchat, of course, found out that it had a really fatal flaw because you can just take a screenshot of it, which was happening all over the place. So then Snapchat says, nope, no more screenshots. Then Apple got really mad at Snapchat for disabling screenshots in their app because that wasn't part of their agreement. If you're going to be in the App Store, you have to allow our users to take screenshots. So it went back. So now you can take screenshots in Snapchat again, which means we can catch sexting again, more or less. That's a pretty simplified version. But in essence, you can say you're only going to see this picture for 3 seconds. So you've got a 15-year-old girl who says, okay, my boyfriend's been asking me to send him a nude selfie for a year. I'm finally going to do it. I downloaded Snapchat. I'm going to set it for 3 seconds, so he's only going to be able to see it real quick. No. Screenshot. Sent to whoever he wants because it's in the phone just like any other picture, right? This is scary because students, especially if you think of a 12-year-old or 13-year-old using this technology, will read that it disappears. It doesn't disappear. Even if somebody doesn't take a screenshot of it, it does not disappear. We now have cases across the country where Snapchat has responded to subpoenas and other sorts of legal processes to get this information disclosed. It is magical how quickly they can come up with those pictures which have disappeared. The same goes for people hacking Snapchat, right? I don't know that anybody's hacked celebrity Snapchats and put that stuff out there, but we've got them happening all over the place. If you go to Google, and I wouldn't necessarily do this unless you get paid to give presentations like this, and type in leaked Snapchat pictures, 75-80% of them will be nude pictures of somebody that took them and thought nobody will ever see this because it'll be gone in 10 seconds. It's happening. Kids are using it. Easily the most common case or common thing that we get, kids don't text each other sex messages anymore. They Snapchat them. It's a lot easier to use, and it could, if you have the agreement with your significant other not to take a screenshot, go away. But we'll see what happens when that agreement is suddenly breached and one of them takes a screenshot and decides it'd be great to send it to all their friends. Girls Snapchatted a video to a boy. So it's two girls who go topless, and they take a video of themselves standing in the mirror, giggling, haha, we're topless, sending a topless Snapchat video, send it to boys in their class. The boy, obviously, what does he do? He can't take screenshots fast enough, right? He's taking screenshots of these two girls that are topless in his class, forwards it to all of his friends, right? Probably about 300 of his closest friends. 3 different boys, because parents had called in and said, what in the heck, this kid forwarded these messages to my son or my daughter. The cops came in, arrested 3 boys, including this one, the initial forwarder at school. We're talking handcuffs. I think they were 16, 17 years old. Handcuffs, walked out of school. Why? Because state law and federal law consider this a distribution of child pornography. Each charge, here's how many screenshots he got, 12. Because each of these students was charged with 12 different counts of distribution of child pornography, which I will posit to you is one of the worst things to be charged with as a juvenile, because judges now look at this and say, I could understand if your parent, who's never had this technology, might mess it up. But you knew exactly what you were doing, right? So it's sort of the opposite effect of the juveniles get to plead ignorance. You've got the exact opposite thing happening now. They don't get to plead ignorance because they're the ones that know how to use this stuff. And so you've got minors charged with true adult distribution of child pornography. They were found guilty by a jury in Virginia. Again, Virginia is one of those more progressive states that has passed the Rebecca's Law for cyberbullying, has a strong law against sexting. Nebraska now does too, we'll talk about in a second. But they've essentially appealed their sentences. We don't have a ruling on it yet because the case was decided in 2013. We probably won't have an appeal decision for probably at least until the spring. But eventually we'll know if in Virginia these boys will be fully convicted and probably by the time that they're sentenced as adults have all sorts of consequences, which we'll talk about here in a second. Iowa versus Canal. The state Iowa, has a case where Mr. Canal and his friend, who was a girl, were bored in a small town Iowa Friday night. And they thought, hey, you know, this is all the rage, right? All the cool kids are doing it. You and I don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend, so what if I just take a picture of my penis and send it to you? Doesn't that sound fun? I'm not kidding. This is literally the defense that they made to the judge. They said, we were totally kidding, had absolutely no sexual intent behind it. I was not a predator against her. She was not intending to comply with my attempts at sexual advances. This was just 2 bored kids in Iowa trying to be cool. He sends picture of the penis. Both agreed that it was not at all erotic. Whose parents were not too happy about it, especially whose dad was not too happy about it? The girls. The boy lived around the block and then 3 houses down. So truly, I'm a big golfer. He probably could hit a pitching wedge out of his front yard and hit the other kid's house, maybe 100 yards away. And they're sitting in the basement sending nude pictures to themselves. So the parents of the girl call the cops and say, what the heck, right? We don't like this. This is crazy. They charge the kid for distribution of child pornography. He's convicted by a jury. He does appeal. And the appeals court in Iowa says, nope, sorry, you were 18 years old. No, you're 17 at the time it happened. You were convicted. You're guilty of distribution of child pornography. You, Mr. Canal, are now a registered sex offender for the next 25 years. Oh, and by the way, that prison sentence as an 18-year-old is not going to be too fun. Goes to prison a year and a half, I think, 18 months. I don't know if there was a civil or a criminal fine in this or not, but went to prison, is a convicted sex offender in Iowa for the next 25 years. Florida, yeah, this one's crazy. We have an understanding, right? I'll send you pictures, but I know, because I love you so much, that you'll never send them to anybody else. Mr. Alpert says, oh, of course, honey. Not a chance in the world. I promise you I would never do it. Well, they break up. So what is the first thing he does? I can't believe she did that. He hits select all in his contact list and forwards it to everybody. And by select all, I mean select all. The pastor at church, his parents, her parents, football coach, the different coaches, basketball coach who sends out text messages about practices, his grandma, every single person in his phone gets the nude pictures of Mr. Alpert's girlfriend that she had sent to him when they were dating, because of course, he would never send them to anybody else. This is love we're talking about. He is convicted of, I don't remember how many counts. It was crazy. We thought if this case is what's going to happen to kids sexting in Nebraska or any other place across the country, they're going to lock up half of them. Because Mr. Alpert's case is like, okay, here's the book, Mr. Alpert, we're going to throw the entire thing at you. This isn't happening in Florida. Why? Because the judge is probably 73 years old, has got a granddaughter that's about Mr. Alpert's age, and says, you know what? If Mr. Alpert could do that to this girl, what would he do to my granddaughter? Pow. On the sex offender registry until he's 43 years old. Good luck getting into college. Good luck getting most jobs. I think Mr. Alpert wanted to be a teacher, coincidentally. Not going to happen. Never going to pass the character and fitness tests. Another one of these cases we have. Now, I will tell you that we have had some similar to this in Nebraska, not exactly like it, but I only did it because we were in love and he said he'd break up with me if I didn't send it and told me he'd never send it to anybody else, but then he sent it to everybody else and it actually made it 3 states away by the next day. That happens all the time. All the time. I guarantee there is some student in Lincoln Public Schools and any public schools across the state who has had their nude picture in somebody's phone a state outside of Nebraska. Guarantee it. I can tell you of 3 or 4 cases already where it's happened. Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Now, of course, these are the cases where girl only sends it to boy, boy sends it to everybody else. Girls have been prosecuted not as much because, generally speaking, again, this is one of the areas where the law lags behind. They can charge the boy with distribution of child pornography, but can they charge the girl with creating child pornography if it's a picture of herself? In a lot of states, no. So again, now you'll see in Nebraska, they've changed it so that now we do catch this problem. But in some states, it was more of an interpretation of their state law. And it's a lot easier to convict somebody from sending it on than it was to determine, for example, motives. Was the girl who took the picture under some sort of criminal duress, right? Some sort of, I'm not thinking clearly. Now, I'm going to get a lot of eye rolls. I do all the time. Why is she not just as culpable? Totally get it. Don't disagree with you. It's just the law not catching up with technology fast enough. Could be. He could be charged with possession of child pornography. He can avoid it in Nebraska by not sending it to anybody else and by reporting it to an adult. There is an affirmative defense in Nebraska. It's in a lot of states are going to this now, so is the federal government. There's an affirmative defense. If you are the unintended, unwanted recipient of one of these messages, you only get in trouble if you forward it on. Now, I'll tell you that it is, you need to talk to your kids about this, right? They need to know this, because if they forward it on, even if they weren't the original boyfriend or girlfriend in the setting, if they get it because ex-boyfriend, who's now ex-boyfriend, was a friend of theirs, and they forwarded it to 2 other kids, in Nebraska, that person is guilty of distribution of child pornography. So I'll show you what the affirmative defense looks like so you have some concept of what not to do. But in general, yeah, if you're the recipient of it, the only way you get out of that in Nebraska is to not forward it on to somebody.
What if you say
If you save it for purposes of showing somebody, you know, I'm going to show my parents, I'm going to show a police officer, I'm going to show a teacher, I'm going to show an administrator, fine. But generally speaking, here's what happens in these cases, at least in my experience. The cops will come in and say, okay, got it, plug their little thing in, take the picture off the phone if they need to, delete it. Generally speaking, that's how it works. Now, there have also been cases where the cops thought they deleted the picture from the phone, student had a friend hack the phone, got the picture right back. If you can hack an app, you can of course hack your deleted files in your phone, right? So, yeah.
So if my child receives a picture and I've told them to report it to an adult and they come to me, what do I do?
Call the cops.
Call the cops?
Yep. And it's crazy, right? Because you could be calling the cops on your next door neighbor's kid.
Exactly.
I totally get it.
What if it's somebody that you want to try and work it out with the family first and not go to that extreme? Does that in any way make us liable?
I am here as a mere conduit of the laws and case law of Nebraska. I am in no sense giving legal advice. I am in no sense giving legal advice. You may well see somebody's kid knock over a mailbox, right? Which is a misdemeanor in Nebraska. You might call the cops or you might go over to their house and say, hey, your son just knocked over my mailbox. You've seen a crime, right? You're under no general obligation to report a crime. You can make sure that your own child doesn't get reported or doesn't get charged with the crime by making sure they don't forward the picture, by deleting the picture, which there's sort of a lag in Nebraska law there because if your kid can then go hack the phone and get the picture back and send it without you knowing, your choice is to call the cops, your other choice. It's just the way that the cops have basically, the legislature has said, I don't care about the friendship that you have with your neighbor. That's not my business. My business is making sure that your kid doesn't forward that on to somebody else because that's using federal wires and state wires and that's distributing child pornography. Yeah?
What if they receive that text on the way walking out of school? Do they have an obligation to report it to the school staff member?
I would. I'd turn right back around and report because I can tell you this, if you report to the school and a principal has a suspect of any violation, reasonable suspicion of any violation of criminal law, they have a statutory obligation to report it to the cops. If somebody's sexting, that could be, for a lot of reasons, it could be some form of child abuse, right? If it's like a predator sort of situation, again, another affirmative obligation by school officials to report. I will tell you, we'll get to some slides on this as we conclude here, but generally speaking, I would always, I think as a principal, as an administrator, you'd say, sure, come tell me, I'll pass it on, right? I mean, that's just how, I think that's the nature of administrators is to pass it on. They're not going to call, generally, on my advice anyway, they wouldn't call the parents of the person who sent it to that kid to tell them, hey, you can come deal with this if you want and I won't report it because they have a statutory obligation to report it as an administrator. If they don't, their certificate can be taken away because they haven't complied with statute. So if your kid's walking out of school and gets it, hightail it right back around and tell the closest adult, teacher, administrator that they can find. Absolutely. That's my non-legal advice, legal advice, because that's the only way to make sure that your kid does not get dinged with distribution of child pornography. Now, there is prosecutorial discretion here, right? Some prosecutors in counties in Nebraska will say, yeah, your kid takes it to an adult, shows the adult, nobody knows what to do with it, gets home, dad says, or whatever it might be, sends it to parents, says, oh, I'm freaked out, I don't know what to do. Technically speaking, your kid just distributed child pornography to you. But there are some prosecutors in Nebraska who are smart enough to say, that's not the heart of this, so I'm not going to prosecute that case. So not all is lost, right? I mean, do what's reasonable to you, act reasonably, rationally, and it'll be okay. The problem is Mr. Alperts of the world that are sending it to everybody and their dog, and their pastor, and their coaches, and their teachers. So, like I said, tell somebody, absolutely, report it. Yeah, there's not a good answer there. You could be reporting your best friend who's also your neighbor. I totally get it. I don't know what I would do if I was a parent in that situation 15 years from now and it was my daughter. I have no idea. Yeah, question.
You touched on our horrific case where the girl was held down. What if we had any cases or know anything where a picture had been taken in a locked room without the person knowing where they were half dressed or something, or at a slumber party?
Absolutely.
The total kids are not allowed at a slumber party where there's phones
Yep.
and set and change in the bathroom with the door locked.
Absolutely.
Because I think kids, especially the younger ones that have the iPods in them, they're 10, 11, they're taking funny pictures, they're not even paying any attention to what's going on in the background.
Yep.
And they're sending it before they realize there's someone half dressed.
Sure. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's not sexting, but it's still gonna be kids
Yeah.
that are not dressed.
And in that case, I would say that you haven't violated the criminal intent of Nebraska's law, probably. I think a prosecutor, at least I would argue to the prosecutor, you've got people like Mr. Alpert out there, you know, this 11-year-old who has taken a funny picture because he made the goofiest face in the mirror and happened to be one of his friends 20 feet behind him, you know, or female, whatever it might be.
Something that we should be aware of.
Oh, absolutely.
How dangerous
If you're not looking through your kids' pictures, you should be, no question.
it is that the cameras, because a picture can be taken of our child at any time and posted up on Instagram or anything.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, none of these social networking sites have anything to prevent you from putting a pornographic bit of content up there. They can certainly come after you if it's been up there and they're notified of it, but there's not a lot they can do to stop it from happening in the first place, even accidentally, no question.
All right, well, we want to thank you all for coming tonight. The PTO, we also want to thank Hill, Cabot, and Adams PTO for helping us fund this amazing, scary, informational, awesome presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, and just so you know, there's like some recommendation stuff here. I'll send it. You guys can get it if you want it.
Okay.